do America's business. For those of you in the audience, there'll be no audience participation of any kind, and that includes with signals, with signs, or obviously standing up or speaking. If you do that, you'll be removed, arrested, and processed as usual and banned from the committee for a year. So with that, we're glad to have you here and glad you came to watch, but this is America's business here. We have some senators who have to get on their way but want to make introductions, so I'm going to start. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Shaheen, and members of the committee, it is a real honor to sit before you today to introduce my friend and Floridian, Kevin Moreno Cabrera, to this committee. I'd also like to recognize Kevin's mother, Gazelle, who's here today. You must be very proud. In nominating another Floridian to his administration, President Trump made an excellent choice in Kevin to serve as ambassador to Panama. Born in Miami to Cuban exiles, Kevin understands firsthand the importance of democracy, free enterprise, and strong international alliances. Kevin currently serves as a county commissioner in Miami-Dade County and vice chair of the Miami-Dade International Trade Consortium, and many of these are here supporting him today. During his term in office, he has successfully led trade missions to key global markets, including France, South Africa, Japan, the United Kingdom, and Ireland. Kevin understands the need for good trade partners in the Western Hemisphere and the impact it has in preventing Communist China and other adversaries from gaining any grip in the region, all while doing everything we can to bring a new day of freedom and democracy to our neighbors in Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and all around the Western Hemisphere. President Trump chose a leader who can deliver for Americans and for the great men and women of our diplomatic service who are stationed in Panama. Panama was one of the countries I visited there a couple times when I was governor. I also visited, that's my first co-delegate, as a senator in 2019. I met some of the wonderful team at the embassy there on the ground working to represent our best interests, just as Kevin will do. With his and Secretary of State Marco Rubio's leadership, our diplomatic mission in Panama will be very, very, very successful. Panama plays a serious role in America's international trade mission. This is why we need strong leadership like Kevin at the helm. I am confident that his skills, his character, his expertise will make him an effective ambassador to Panama. I look forward to hearing from him today on his vision for U.S.-Panama relations and how he plans to advance President Trump's agenda. Together with President Trump and Secretary Rubio, I'm confident Kevin will help restore peace through strength and stand for America's best interests. He has my full support. I urge my colleagues to advance his nomination quickly. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Scott. We appreciate that. Senator Cruz, I understand you also are on a short chain, so we're going to recognize you to introduce Mr. Rubenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is an honor to introduce Reed Rubenstein today before the committee. I first met Reed back in 2014 when he was the attorney representing the victims of the 2009 Fort Hood terrorist attack carried out by jihadist Nidal Hassan. I worked closely with Reed on one of my very first pieces of legislation that was passed into law, which addressed the Fort Hood attack and the Obama administration's refusal to award Purple Hearts to the victims. You'll recall they called it workplace violence instead of terrorism. And on the Senate Armed Services Committee, I introduced an amendment to mandate that the Purple Heart be awarded. That amendment got bipartisan support, passed into law, and I was proud to be there at Fort Hood when those Purple Hearts were finally awarded, although sadly years after that horrific attack. Reed is an experienced lawyer with more than 30 years in private practice, litigating constitutional, administrative, and complex commercial trial and appellate cases. He has also counseled publicly traded and closely held corporations on regulatory compliance, M&A, and transactional matters while handling executive branch and congressional oversight, investigations, and enforcement issues. He is exceptionally well qualified to serve as legal advisor to the State Department. With his strong legal background and previous experience as a Deputy Associate Attorney General in the U.S. Department of Justice and as General Counsel to the U.S. Department of Education during President Trump's first term, I have no doubt that Reed will serve our nation with the utmost integrity. I have full confidence in Reed. I support his nomination, and I look forward to seeing him confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Cruz. We appreciate that. I know you've got another commitment that you've got to make, and so we'll excuse you. Next, I'm going to move to Senator Boozman. And most importantly, Kathy's with you today. Is that right, Senator Boozman?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you and Ranking Member Shaheen and the rest of my distinguished colleagues. It's an honor to be here today to introduce my friend and fellow Arkansan, Governor Mike Huckabee, President Trump's nominee for U.S. Ambassador to Israel. I know Senator Cotton would have liked to be here too. In fact, it was the first call I received very early this morning, reminding me to tell everybody how much he supported this and what a great ambassador he thinks that Governor Huckabee would make. I would also like to say hi to Governor Huckabee's family and friends here in attendance and how glad we are that they are supporting him. We all know these are family affairs, whether it's us or people that serve in other aspects of government. This is a pivotal moment in our history, not just for our country, but for Israel and the special relationship between our nations. I've had the privilege of knowing the governor for many years, and I can say without hesitation, he's the right person to be our representative to Israel at this critical moment. And I'm thankful to President Trump for selecting such a staunch and passionate advocate for the Jewish state. Mike was raised in Hope, Arkansas, and went on to graduate from Ouachita Baptist University, where he majored in religion. He then attended Southwest Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth in preparation for a lifetime of ministry, and included pastoring Emmanuel Baptist Church in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and later at Beach Street Baptist Church in Texarkana, Arkansas. He went on to serve as president of the Arkansas Baptist State Convention, where his leadership and communication skills intersected at the cornerstone of his life, spreading the gospel and shepherding fellow Christians in their faith, and foreshadowed his calling into public service. Mike served as the 44th governor of Arkansas for over a decade, with his time as their state's chief executive marked by his tireless pursuit of pragmatic solutions, a tireless work ethic, and an innate ability to forge relationships across political divides. He brought transformational change to Arkansas, leaving a legacy of lower taxes, job creation, improvement of state infrastructure, K through 16 education reform, and his enactment of a nationally recognized health initiative focused on disease prevention. Mike is not only qualified to serve as our ambassador to Israel, but he is uniquely suited for this role, given the way he has championed Israel throughout his entire life, including as a steadfast supporter of Israel's right to exist and defend itself. He's had an intimate familiarity with Israel's people and its leaders, having frequently visited for over 50 years, leading groups to the region since 1981. He also understands the importance of diplomacy and has profound respect and appreciation for it. And he has worked persistently throughout his life to advocate for strengthening and furthering the distinctly profound ties between our two countries. As the United States ambassador to Israel, he will bring thoughtful, principled approach to our relationship, as his extensive experience already shows. He believes, like many of us, that the United States and Israel share a sacred bond that transcends politics, both in terms of shared values and mutual security. In an increasingly dangerous world, where Israel is under constant attack from Iran and its terrorist proxies, the United States needs a representative in Israel who not only understands the complex Middle East geopolitics, but can navigate them with conviction, strength, and tact. Governor Huckabee's background, character, and experience all uniquely qualify him to be that figure at this moment for this purpose. His deep understanding and love for Israel and its people will undoubtedly make him an exceptional ambassador. I know that he will represent the United States with honor, integrity, and an ironclad commitment to the enduring partnership between our two nations. I look forward to seeing all the great things he will do as the United States ambassador to Israel. I strongly support his nomination and urge my colleagues to do the same, as does my colleague, Senator Cotton from Arkansas. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Bozeman. I know you've got other things you have to do too, so we'll excuse you, but thank you very much, and I'm sure Mr. Huckabee very much appreciates your kind words for him. And I know I talked to Tom Cotton, too. He wishes he could be here, but he's got some things biting him right now, that, like we all do from time to time. But he likewise would have had a strong introduction and support for you. So thank you, Senator Bozeman. So where we're going to go today is I'm going to make an opening statement. I'm going to yield to my distinguished colleague for her opening statement. Then we'll hear from the nominees, and then we're going to do a round of questions and possibly a second if there's interest. So with that, today we have, we're going to hear from 3 more of the President Trump's national security nominees. These positions are key to advancing President Trump's America First foreign policy priorities and helping America's friends while pushing back against our enemies. Governor Huckabee, as U.S. Ambassador to Israel, you would represent us at one of the most important postings in the world. Israel is one of America's greatest allies, a bastion of freedom in the Middle East, and our closest partner in countering Iran's destabilizing efforts in the region. For years, the previous administration withheld American support that was necessary for Israel. Not all of it, but some of it, and in the wake of the horrendous attacks on October 7th. Despite that, Israel had the courage to confront Iran and its proxies, and it decimated them. Now, thanks to President Trump's tough negotiations and Israel's courage, Iran is at its weakest point in decades, and hostages are returning home. In the Middle East now has an opportunity to free itself from Iran's grip, and America will be safer for it. To promote stability in the region and protect our national security, we need to continue to support Israel's efforts however we can. This includes providing Israel the weapons it needs to defend itself and working with Israel to ensure both American and Israeli hostages are brought home from the clutches of Hamas. Governor Huckabee, I look forward to hearing how you will support our ally and help support and facilitate peace and stability in the region. Mr. Cabrera, Panama is a strategic ally, and our long historic partnership is anchored in shared economic and security interests. The United States is Panama's largest foreign direct investor with a total of $3.8 billion invested in a range of sectors. But as you know, China seeks to undermine our work in Panama, particularly when it comes to the Panama Canal. The President is right to focus on China's involvement in this critical infrastructure. The fact is, China will continue to use its footholds in Latin America to threaten the U.S. and our economic interests. We need to counter its presence in Panama and make sure China cannot control shipping through the canal like a pawn in its malign chess game. Additionally, more must be done to counter transnational criminal organizations that profit from illegal migration and the trafficking of illicit narcotics that kill Americans. President Trump is leading the charge on a generational shift in American politics and American foreign policy. The President meant business when he told the American people that he would put their interests first, and he has taken extraordinary action in his first weeks in office to make this happen. Mr. Rubenstein, as legal advisor, you'll be charged with providing Secretary Rubio sound legal advice as he executes President Trump's foreign policy agenda. Your background in complex litigation and prior experience in the executive branch will serve you well in this challenging role. Just like all the nominees who have testified before us this year, you will have a big job. You will be tasked with defending the interests of this great nation in the history during a very turbulent time. Americans are counting on your leadership. I look forward to a productive conversation today and for all of your swift confirmations. Thank you. Senator Shaheen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I get to my prepared remarks, opening remarks, I would like to express concern about the sharing of classified information that has been such a big story on the news in the last 24 hours. And I hope that this committee will express our concern about sharing classified information with the Department of State, as Secretary Rubio was on that call, and also with making sure that we are safeguarding critical information as the Records Act requires. So I would, as a member of the Intelligence Committee, I know you know better than most how important this is, and I hope you'll join me in making sure that we send that message to the Department of State. Now, I would like to welcome our nominees, your families and supporters who are here with you today. From representing the United States at our embassies in Israel and Panama to serving as the legal advisor for the entire Department of State, the posts you've been nominated to fill are incredibly consequential. In the wake of the Hamas attacks and Israel's campaign in Gaza, we've been working to avoid escalation and a wider regional war. A war that would not only threaten all our allies in the region, but would be dangerous for the United States. I believe the ceasefire the Trump administration helped implement between Israel and Hamas was a good first step. However, I do not agree with the idea of the U.S. owning Gaza or forcibly displacing Gazans, as the president has suggested. Getting drawn into this conflict and putting American troops on the ground in Gaza, I think, would be a disaster. But the ceasefire began an important process of getting Israeli hostages returned home. It opened up opportunities for humanitarian aid to reach Palestinians. Sadly, with Israel resuming the attacks in Gaza, violence has returned and the entire region is threatened again. Instead of moving to a second phase, we are standing by and watching as the ceasefire agreement comes undone. I think it's important for us to get the parties back to the negotiating table to focus on phase 2 and to get all of the hostages released to achieve long-term peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians. Mr. Huckabee, I know you've supported Israeli annexation of the West Bank and advocated for total Israeli control of Palestinian territory, as we discussed yesterday when you were kind enough to meet with me. This rhetoric is highly incendiary across the Middle East and the entire Muslim world. And so I hope that will think about how to advance long-term peace and stability in the region. Mr. Cabrera, I'm also concerned about the threats from this administration toward a friendly government in our own hemisphere, and that is Panama. I take the risk of China's influence very seriously, both along the Panama Canal and across the region, and I'm concerned that escalating threats about the U.S. reclaiming the canal, even if they're only meant as a start for negotiations or to extract concessions, could have dangerous unintended consequences. If confirmed, you will be leading the American Embassy in Panama at a time when sound judgment and experience are needed. I hope you will speak to your plan to ensure that threats and saber-rattling do not lead Panama and other countries to hedge their bets with the United States, to drive them to explore closer rather than more distant relationships with China in the long term. Finally, Mr. Rubenstein, if confirmed, you will hold one of the most significant positions at the State Department as the legal advisor. You would be providing legal advice on areas that are not only critical to our national security, but in many cases, these are areas that have been the focus of a relentless attack by this administration and Elon Musk. Your advice would cover visa operations and border security, hiring and firing decisions for personnel, sexual discrimination in the workplace, the security of sensitive data, the payment of foreign assistance and operating funds. Many of these issues have been the bedrock of 6 decades of investment that have made the United States more respected and influential than any other nation. I've always supported reforming government and making sure our tax dollars are spent wisely. But across America's foreign policy and national security agencies, the administration has acted without regard for U.S. laws enacted by Congress to establish agencies and how funds should be spent. So I hope you will address in your remarks what role you believe Congress plays in these questions, or whether the President, using the theory of the unitary executive, has the right to unilaterally override congressional authorizations and appropriations. I look forward to hearing each of your thoughts and insights. Thank you all.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. I should respond briefly to the comments regarding the leakage on the intelligence matter. I spoke with Secretary Rubio about this at length yesterday, and he sat next to me on the Intelligence Committee for 15 years. He is really aware of these kinds of things. We have leakage that happens from time to time. I can assure you that his knowledge is such and his commitment is such that he had no knowledge of there being the tap on that there was when he was communicating. So this is a matter that's going to be investigated. Obviously, we're going to know a lot more about it as the facts roll out. But from the State Department standpoint, I can assure you there was nobody at the State Department that was aware at all that there was the leakage that was going on. So, but I appreciate your concern. I don't think there's anybody that wouldn't be concerned about a serious leak like this. So we'll move on as best we can. So with that, we're going to do a round of questions. I want to start with Mr. Cabrera on regarding the Panama.
Let him do the opening.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Let's see. Let's start with Mr. Huckabee.
Chairman Risch and Ranking Member Shaheen, distinguished members of the committee, I want to say thank you very, very much for giving me the privilege of coming to...
Sorry about that. Committee will come back to order, and Mr. Huckabee, please proceed.
I will mark them down undecided, Senator. I want to thank you for the privilege of coming before you today as you conduct the constitutional obligation of advise and consent of those who have been nominated by the President to serve as an ambassador to our beloved nation. The founders recognized that Senate approval was not necessarily Senate agreement with the President, his policies, or even with those he selected to represent him. But the Senate affirms that those nominated be thoroughly examined to determine moral and legal fitness to serve. I'm aware that not everyone on this committee will agree with the President's policies or his personnel choices in his administration. I'm not here to articulate or even defend my own views or policies, but rather to present myself as one who will respect and represent the overwhelmingly elected President. President Trump's historic first-term success with the Abraham Accords, I believe, gives us real hope of what will happen over the next 4 years. And I'm grateful that President Trump has charged me with the extraordinary privilege to serve as ambassador to the State of Israel if confirmed. I'm blessed to have a wonderful and supportive family, especially my wife of almost 51 years, Janet, who is with me today. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, we look quite young to have been married 51 years, but we got married when we were 18. And in Arkansas, we were considered late bloomers. My 3 adult children and my 7 grandchildren are watching, and I'm grateful for them. I grew up in a small orange brick shotgun rent house in a little town called Hope, Arkansas. No male upstream from me, not one, in my entire family lineage had ever graduated from high school. The very notion that I would one day be governor of my state or be nominated to serve as an ambassador would have been laughable in my childhood. I stand here today grateful to God for his grace and goodness, and it is the only explanation for my being here. I would say the same for the nation that I've been nominated to deploy to. Israel is a tiny nation the size of New Jersey. And it's the only rational explanation for its existence in various forms for the past 3,500 years would be the grace and...
Christianity to justify ethnic cleansing. Huckabee misuses Christianity to justify ethnic cleansing. Free Palestine. Senators ask him about the end game of Christian Zionism for Palestinians in Israel. Free Palestine. Free Palestine.
Well, the good news is they're not members of my family, which might be the case protesting me sometimes. I first visited Israel almost 52 years ago. It was the summer of 1973. It was just 3 months before the Yom Kippur War. I was 17 years old, right out of high school. It was a month before my 18th birthday. And despite my growing up in poverty, my soon-to-be college roommate came from an affluent family. We really were the prince and the pauper. My friend wanted to take a senior trip to the Middle East. Now, his father was willing to let him go, but only if I went along, and the father offered to pay my way to make it possible. In that summer, we went to Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Greece, Turkey, Cyprus, and Israel. All of them were fascinating, but it was Israel that had an impact on me that 52 years later, I still find hard to explain. I started taking groups of people to visit there in 1981. I've led tens of thousands of people to visit the Bible lands. The number of trips that I've made there probably approximates 100. I've made deep and lasting friendships among Jewish and Arab populations.
Israel and the U.S. have desecrated the Holy Land. Desecrating the Holy Land. Ethnic cleansing. Stop the ethnic cleansing. Stop the ethnic cleansing.
Thank you, Senator. I still believe it is the Promised Land. It's holy ground to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Since 1948, when Israel was finally recognized as an independent Jewish state, it has always been under attack. The first nation to officially recognize Israel was the United States, when our president, Harry S. Truman, did so within minutes of it being constituted as an independent state. Israel faced an immediate war in 1948 from the nations that surrounded it. It had another one in 1956, 1967, 1973, and yet others in 1982, 1990, and 2014. The terrorist group Hamas launched an attack October the 7th of 2023 against innocent civilians, including pregnant women, elderly people, and even tiny and helpless babies. The impact of that massacre continues to this very day. The ongoing war and the situation with the hostages, including American citizens, makes this assignment urgent. This body acted with bipartisanship and great dispatch as a result of the October 7th massacre of Israeli citizens, when our most recent ambassador, Jack Lew, was nominated by President Biden. And that sense of urgency has not dimmed. That war still continues. And for that reason, I respectfully ask your thoughtful consideration for confirmation to become our nation's ambassador to the State of Israel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Huckabee. Mr. Cabrera.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Rich, Ranking Member Shaheen, and distinguished committee members, it is an honor to be here with you today. I'm grateful to President Trump for nominating me to be the next U.S. ambassador to the Republic of Panama, and Secretary Rubio for his support throughout the process. With your concurrence and approval, I look forward to beginning my work in Panama and serving the people of the United States of America. I appreciate the opportunities I've had to meet with many of you and discuss our bilateral relationship with Panama. I take this opportunity to serve as ambassador with great seriousness, humility, and clarity of purpose. If confirmed, I look forward to continuing our dialogue on national politics and ensuring our country's strengths and partnerships with Panama. As a proud first-generation American and son of Cuban exiles, I carry a deep appreciation for the opportunities this country has given me and my family. My family's journey from hardship and oppression to freedom and success has shaped my values and reinforced my commitment to the ideals of liberty and democracy. This personal history instills in me a profound sense of duty to uphold these principles and work for our nation's interest. From day one, President Trump has made it clear that U.S. foreign policy must always prioritize the interests of America and its citizens. His America First policy directive reaffirmed our commitment to achieving peace through strength while ensuring that our diplomacy reflects U.S. values, sovereignty, and security. As I sit here before you today, I recall Secretary Rubio's confirmation hearing, where he outlined a clear and principled vision for U.S. foreign policy, one rooted in strength, purpose, and accountability. He framed it around three fundamental questions. Does this make America stronger? Does this make America safer? And does this make America more prosperous? These questions reflect a core mission of American diplomacy. They serve as a guiding framework that I fully embrace. I take this charge seriously, knowing that representing the United States abroad is both a privilege and a solemn duty. My mother, a woman of faith who's with us today, always reminded me that to whom much is given, much is expected. Her wisdom and resilience have shaped my approach to service. She's taught me that faith and hard work can overcome even the greatest obstacles, and a lesson I always carry forward. The U.S.-Panama bilateral relationship is of paramount importance, rooted in shared values and mutual interest. Our partnership spans a wide range of areas, including shared security concerns, immigration cooperation, and economic engagement. This relationship is vital to the stability and prosperity of the Western Hemisphere. One of the key aspects of our cooperation is ensuring the security of the Panama Canal, a critical international waterway that facilitates global trade and economic growth. Our collaborative efforts with Panama to maintain the canal's neutrality and security are essential for safeguarding this strategic asset. Recent actions such as Panama's decision to exit the Belt and Road Initiative and audit the port concessions demonstrate their commitment to this shared goal. Immigration cooperation is another cornerstone of our bilateral relationship. Both nations face challenges related to illegal immigration and transnational criminal activity. By working together, we can develop effective strategies to manage immigration flows, combat human trafficking, and enhance border security while contributing to long-term regional stability. Economic engagement between the United States and Panama is also a critical component of this partnership. The U.S. investments in Panama support energy production, infrastructure development, and foster economic resilience and growth, while working to enhance supply chain resiliency and further strengthening our economic ties and benefiting both nations. Throughout my career, I've worked across party lines to advance policies that benefit our community. As an elected official, I have worked with and today have the support of Democrat leaders, including the Mayor of Miami-Dade County, Daniela Levine Cava, former Minority Leader of the Florida House of Representatives, Keone McGee, who's with us here today, and former Minority Leader of the Florida Senate, Oscar Brannan. These partnerships demonstrate my ability to build consensus and to work in the best interests of the people we serve. I would bring this same spirit of collaboration to my role as ambassador, ensuring that our foreign policy remains a unifying force for American interest. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of this committee, our relationship with Panama has a direct impact on our safety, security, and the prosperity of American people. As ambassador, it would be my honor to protect American citizens and promote U.S. economic interest. I recognize the obligation of implementing these strategies and the policies of the United States, and I recognize the responsibilities that I have to the Constitution of the United States, the President, the Secretary Rubio, and to Congress members of the United States. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cabrera. Mr. Rubenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Shaheen, members of the committee. It is an honor of a lifetime to appear before you here today as President Donald J. Trump's nominee to serve as legal advisor of the Department of State. I am humbled and grateful for the confidence and the trust that the President and Secretary of State Rubio have shown in me. I will work relentlessly to help them make America safe, strong, and prosperous again. Thank you as well to the members and staff of this committee. I deeply appreciate the time you have made available to me. If confirmed, I look forward to working closely with you. Over the course of my career, I've had the great good fortune to work with and learn from accomplished men and women of great moral strength, high character, and a deep commitment to our nation, our citizens, and our Constitution. Some of them are here with us today from America First Legal Foundation. To my many friends, colleagues, and teachers, I thank you. Finally, thank you to my dear family, my wife Betsy, who is here with us today, our children, 3 sons and 3 daughters-in-law, our 7, God willing, soon to be 8 grandchildren, my siblings and their spouses. I wish to especially acknowledge my mother. She and her twin sister, natives of Flint, Michigan. They just turned 89 3 days ago, and both are still going strong. They prove that Flint, for decades an American manufacturing powerhouse, once knew how to make great things that last. I am incredibly blessed to be here before you. If confirmed, it would be my privilege to lead more than 300 lawyers and staff in the Office of the Legal Advisor. These great professionals are widely acknowledged to be the best international lawyers in the world. Edwin D. Williamson, who served with great distinction as the legal advisor for Secretary of State James Baker, has opined that the legal advisor's responsibility and role should be to use the best legal skills to reach correct legal decisions that give the client the most legal options for reaching the client's desired goal. I share Mr. Williamson's opinion. President Trump and Secretary Rubio's policies, orders, and directives are crystal clear. The department must champion core American interests and always put America and American citizens first. To that end, it has been tasked with defending American sovereignty and protecting the rule of law. This means, among other things, excluding or removing aliens, including student visa holders, who violate our laws, who preach or call for sectarian violence, for overthrowing or replacing the culture on which our constitutional republic stands, or provide advocacy, aid, or support for foreign terrorists, such as the bestial perpetrators of the October 7 atrocities. The department has also been charged with securing better national and economic security results for our citizens by restoring commercial statecraft as a foreign policy priority. If confirmed as the legal advisor, I will work with my career and political colleagues to provide the best possible legal advice and counsel to get these things done. If confirmed, this would be the second time that I have served as a cabinet agency's general counsel. During the first Trump administration, after stints at the Departments of the Treasury, Agriculture, and Justice, I was the acting general counsel of the Department of Education. There, among other things, I worked closely and collaboratively with career and political attorneys, Department of Justice colleagues, other federal agency partners, and congressional members and staff to expose and combat malign foreign influence in the U.S. higher education industry. We uncovered approximately 20,000 previously unreported foreign transactions, totaling over $17 billion. Jeez. We facilitated multiple law enforcement actions, and we amplified congressional oversight. Our work was lawful and effective, and it put America and American citizens first. If confirmed, I will bring that same energy, commitment, and collaborative ethos to my work at the Department of State. In January, Secretary Rubio appeared before you and affirmed that we need a strong and confident America that engages in the world while putting our core national interests above all else. President Trump was elected to keep a promise of a strong America that promotes peace abroad and security and prosperity here at home. Therefore, Secretary Rubio has pledged that every dollar we spend, every program we fund, and every policy we pursue must make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. If confirmed, under my leadership, the Office of the Legal Advisor will provide the advice and counsel that the Secretary needs to help the Department honor this pledge. To do so, we will carefully study the facts of each issue before us and rigorously test, analyze, and apply the applicable law. We will be faithful to the Constitution and to the controlling Supreme Court precedents, and we will do our work with excellence, with honor, and with integrity. Thank you for your consideration. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rubenstein. We appreciate that. We will now go to a round of 5-minute questions, and I want to start with you, Mr. Cabrera. I'm embarrassed to say that one of my predecessors from Idaho was sitting on this committee when the Panama Canal was given away. He collaborated with the president, and the result was that we lost the Panama Canal. I disagreed with him vehemently at that time, as did the people of the state of Idaho, which had obviously drastic consequences for him in the next election. But nonetheless, he got it done before he left, and now we're in a position where that particular piece of real estate is incredibly important to the United States from a national security standpoint. And fortunately, there were some provisions in the treaty that was negotiated at that time that give us a foothold. Could you give us your thoughts on how we're going to reverse this situation?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. I think President Trump and Secretary Rubio, during his trip to Panama, his first trip abroad, which I think goes to show the importance of this issue to both Secretary Rubio and to the department, he articulated that he felt that the neutrality portion of the treaty, Article 4, might be in violation. And I think he's made great strides, is what I will say, during these past 60 days, in which we've seen Panama be the first country to enter the Belt and Road Initiative and be the first country to exit in Central America. We've seen them also, the potential sale that's moving forward with the C.K. Hutchinson to American companies. Again, I think we've made great strides in these first 60 days, and I'm optimistic that we can continue this. I look forward to, if confirmed, working with this committee, working with Secretary Rubio, working with President Trump to continue to make those strides. But one thing I'll add is it's not just the Chinese influence in the canal. You know, we've seen it in all sorts of facets of their society, right? You look at the city of Colón that's received, you know, traffic cameras and streetlight cameras from the Chinese government. Where is the cloud being stored? Who has access to this, right? You look at some of the cranes in Manzanillo Port, which again are Chinese. You know, do they have access to the technology behind these cranes? As a county commissioner, we have oversight over the port and the airport. And I'll tell you, we face similar questions when we put out to bid cranes at our ports, you know, as to what, you know, security issues might come with. Many times they underbid. You know, a lot of these companies are, you know, they're government owned in China, and they'll underbid, you know, 20, 30% to make sure that you buy their crane. And that sometimes could be an issue because who has access to the information that these cranes might have? Can they stop them at a certain point? Again, it raises all sorts of concerns, but I will say that what I am optimistic is to the great progress that Secretary Rubio has made along with President Trump in these first 60 days. But it is a real concern that they articulate regarding the Chinese influence in the canal. But I would say that, again, it doesn't just extend to the canal, but to society and I think also the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, thank you. I wish you well in your endeavors in that regard and see if we can't get our hands back on what I guess was the largest undertaking outside of the United States of the federal government in a construction lane. Mr. Rubenstein, one of the real issues we had with the last administration, and it was a bipartisan concern, it wasn't just myself and the former, well, at that time, chairman of the committee, did our best to try to extricate information regarding the Rob Malley matter. And we got stiff-armed by the administration and by the State Department. We still don't have a full accounting of that. I'm very much interested in that. I suspect the ranking member is also interested in that. I think I know what happened, but only because of rumors. So will you commit to give us a full briefing on that factually so we can have an understanding of what happened and what we need to do about it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm also interested in Mr. Malley. I can commit that if confirmed, I will consult with my colleagues, get right into the facts because obviously now I'm not, and communicate with Congress appropriately and lawfully. As I mentioned in my last go-round as a general counsel, I worked very closely with Congress. I'm a big believer in keeping the lines of communication as open as possible, and I fully intend to do the same thing here on this issue and others as appropriate.
Thank you. Mr. Huckabee, to me, the Middle East is changing and has changed dramatically over the last decade or so. And I think people will look back in history and say the Abraham Accords were one of the pivotal points where that change took place. Do you agree with me that normalization between Israel and Saudi is a paramount goal for all of us to engage in to finish out what the Abraham Accords have started?
Mr. Chairman, without a doubt, that's got to be one of the most urgent things to happen. There's no reason that there's not a build upon the Abraham Accords. They were historic, significant in so many ways, and brought the reality that whether it's trade or tourism or the sharing of military intelligence for everyone's safety and security in that region are all benefited. Everyone there has pretty much the common adversary, enemy, if you will, and that's Iran, who seem hell-bent on wreaking havoc throughout the entire world, starting in the Middle East. So I believe the president is in an incredible position to build upon what he did in his first term, expanding the Abraham Accords to include not only the Saudis, but other Gulf state nations. And I would look forward very much, if confirmed, to working with all of you to see that to fruition.
Thank you so much. Appreciate those remarks. And with that, I'll turn to Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Rubenstein. your job at the State Department, as I understand, is not to form policy, but to provide legal advice to Secretary Rubio and President Trump on their proposed policies. In your opening statement, you talked about working in a way that was lawful, about your faithful commitment to the Constitution. So can I just ask, do you commit to following the law, to advising against any policy or action that would violate federal law, if confirmed?
I'm sorry, any action that would violate federal law?
Any policy or action that would violate federal law? Doesn't seem like a difficult question.
Thank you for that question, Ranking Member Shaheen. I commit to applying the law, working with my colleagues internally, the Department of State, on more complex issues. The way that we did it before was to reach outside and consult with the Department of Justice and the Office of Legal Counsel, and providing our client with the best possible legal advice outlining various options and potential consequences of different courses of action.
Well, again, let me ask if you can give me a yes or no question. Do you commit to following the law and to advising against policies or actions that would violate current federal law?
Well, so I'm not sure it lends necessarily a yes or no answer, Senator. The law is a conversation. It's one of the great things about it. It's why it's been so interesting to me these 40 years.
I'm married to an attorney for 56 years. I understand what you're saying, but that's...
So when you say...
But what I'm asking you is there a yes or no question to this.
But it, again, I mean, yes, the job of the federal government writ broadly is to follow the law. That is not a controversial proposition at all. The kind of where the rubber hits the road, though, is when you're looking at the margins. And particularly, I know this is of interest in talking with staff, talking with your staff, there are questions about the relative legalities, for example, of certain separation of powers issues on matters that are likely to come up before the department. And there it gets into a gray area. You end up into discussions about what the relative balance is between Congress, say, and the executive with respect to various powers. And often there isn't an absolutely clear answer. So I'm not trying, yes,
well, I will take that as a
government,
no, actually, based on what you just said. And I have to say that makes me concerned, and given some of your past online postings. For example, last year you posted alleging that the Biden administration was engaged in a massive program to overthrow the Israeli government in the middle of a multi-front war. Do you really believe that?
Well, I don't have the checks that were written. I do believe that there are sufficient facts to support that statement. We know that in 2015, actually a committee of this Senate did a report on an outfit called One Voice. During the Obama administration, the State Department was running money to fund an anti-government operation inside of Israel. Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations did this work. The report was not acknowledged much in the United States, but it sure made an impact in Israel when it was issued. Many of the same people who were involved in the Obama administration State Department came back under President Biden. And it appears to us, appears to me, based on emails that I obtained through the Freedom of Information Act and that we read, that the same playbook was being run. We have emails, for example, from an American NGO, and all of this is public record, Senator. I invite you to read it. I can provide it. But we have emails from an American NGO.
I have heard these conspiracy theories before, but I've been here through the Obama administration, through the first Trump administration, through the Biden administration, and I can tell you that I never heard anybody in any of those administrations talking about a multi-front war trying to overthrow the Israeli government. Well, I don't believe it, and I hear you're saying that and trying to justify that as a conspiracy theory. And so I guess what confidence can you give me, can you give this committee, that you can provide impartial, unbiased legal advice that's grounded in facts and the law? And so far, you're not convincing me.
Well, Senator, with respect to the Senate report from the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, I didn't write that. That came out of this body. With respect to the emails that I read between these NGOs and Barbara Leaf, I didn't write those either, just read them. And they say what they say. And perhaps they lend themselves to different interpretations. I'm willing to concede that. But I believe there was a good faith basis for what I said. Now, with respect to my legal advice, there's a difference between advocacy and providing careful. You said you're married to a lawyer for 56 years. There's a difference between advocacy and providing a client with careful, proper legal advice. The way that I have worked in private practice, the way that I worked in my last stint in government, the way that I would work here is to, as I said, rigorously review the facts, learn as much as you can about the situation, apply the relevant authorities, consult with your colleagues, look for the subject matter experts at the Department of State. We are blessed, as I said, with some of the best international law experts in the world to be able to draw on that knowledge, to consult with my colleagues at the Office of the Legal Counsel of the Department of Justice, and then provide the decision makers with the best possible legal advice. And that is what I will do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ricketts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of our nominees for your past public service and also for your willingness to continue to serve our great nation, and for your families who also have sacrificed and serve along with you, so thank you. The Popular Resistance Committees is the third largest terrorist organization in Gaza and also a puppet of Iran. After decades of attacks, including the October 7th attack, it has both American and Israeli blood on its hands. Despite this, the PRC has yet to be properly designated and sanctioned. Later today, Senator Schiff and I will be introducing the Accountability for Terrorist Perpetrators of October 7th Act, which, among other things, will cut off the People's Resistance Committees from the global financial markets. Governor Huckabee, do you agree that the U.S. should hold all terrorist groups who played a role in October 7th accountable for the atrocities?
Senator, a wonderful question, because I feel like that this is one that everyone, Democrat, Republican, and the fact that you have bipartisan support to introduce that bill is very significant. I cannot imagine under any circumstances that any right-minded person would find it acceptable to support or to even acknowledge that there was justification in any way for the massacre of innocent civilians on October the 7th. If I'm confirmed, I will be absolutely clear to carry the president's policies. They have been clear that Hamas will have no future in Gaza. It can't. This was not simply a cold-blooded murder in which people came across the borders and shot innocent people. They massacred them. And they did it in the way that was most physically painful and in the way that was most personally humiliating. And worse, they videotaped themselves doing it because they were proud of it, and they published it with pride. And they announced repeatedly that they would do it again. Hamas is not a government, it's not a standing army, it is a terrorist organization, and they acted like it. And they must be treated as such. And if confirmed, I would hope that this unfortunate, horrific war that has resulted in many, many deaths, including Americans, the taking of hostages for a longer period of time than even the hostages in 1979 were taken during the Iranian takeover, that all of that could come to an end and there could be accountability for what was done to Jewish people on October the 7th of 2023.
So I take by your answer, I can have your commitment to work with me on this piece of legislation that will properly hold the People's Resistance Committees accountable and properly sanctioned and designated. Is that Fair?
Senator, unflinchingly, I commit to you to do that very thing.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to the head of the snake, Iran. Right now, the Ayatollah is reeling. Hamas and Hezbollah have been decimated. Iran's been kicked out of Syria, at least for the time being, after the fall of Assad. Tehran's air defensive have been wiped out by the IDF. And thanks to President Trump reimposing maximum pressure, including sanctioning Communist China's teapot refineries, its economy is in free fall. However, it remains to be seen if, out of desperation, Iran will come to the table or sprint to build a nuclear weapon. President Trump has reportedly given Tehran 2 months to deal or risk severe consequences. Needless to say, Iran, being closer than ever to having a nuclear weapon, isn't just a threat to Israel, it's a threat to the United States and global security in general. It cannot be allowed to happen. Do you agree with President Trump that Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon?
Senator, I appreciate the question because it gives me the opportunity to let you know that I absolutely believe that the president is taking the right course of action. He did it when his first term. The maximum pressure bankrupted the Iranians. It made it impossible for them to fund the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas. They didn't have the money. When his term ended and President Biden took office, unfortunately, they relaxed some of those pressures. And the result was Iran had money again. They didn't use it to help their people. They used it to murder people in Israel through the Houthis, through Hezbollah, and through Hamas. I'm grateful to serve a president who recognizes that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon and that it is better to bankrupt them than it is to bomb them.
And Governor Huckabee, you're exactly right. The Trump administration took Iran's foreign reserves down from $122.5 billion down to under $14 billion. That prevented them from funding groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. So you're exactly right, and this policy of sanctioning them and trying to bankrupt Iran is exactly the right course. So thank you very much. And with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ricketts. Senator Booker.
Governor, it's good to see you here. My office lives with this fierce urgency. There's an American being held right now in Gaza named Idan Alexander. And knowing every day that he's being tortured, his suffering, and that of his family back in New Jersey is one of the central urgencies of my staff and my team. We know that we've seen a lot of the hostage releases happen during ceasefires. And during those times, the pathways to peace are open that would relieve the suffering of innocent Palestinians as well. We know that Hamas cannot remain in control, that they must release hostages and surrender so we can start the reconstruction and secure the safety and security of not just Palestinians, but the Israeli state as well. But again, the grief hanging over many of those who know the families involved makes central clarity to getting this done. I think that one of your most important missions, should you be confirmed, is getting the release of the hostages and aiding to the end of this nightmare that is fueling the suffering of Israelis and Palestinians. And so tactically, I'm curious of your thoughts, especially given the ceasefires that have enabled moments where hostages have been released. You know, during the first ceasefire, we saw releases of numerous hostages and commitments being made. I'm wondering if you can comment on what your thoughts are about how your role could help us get Idan home and an end to this nightmare.
Senator, I appreciate your question, and let me say emphatically that it would not be one of the most important things that I would consider on my duty list, if confirmed. It would be the most important thing. That American citizen from New Jersey that you care deeply about and you've worked so diligently with, and I'm deeply grateful for the efforts you've made with that family. That has to be the first item of business before anything else. Every hostage should have already been home. The only reason they're not is because of Hamas. Hamas, who has used them as bargaining chips, Hamas, who has used them to torture, Hamas, who, when they do release, often only because they feel compelled and absolutely obligated to give them one more day of survival, they do so in the most horrific way by humiliating the hostages.
And I'm going to interrupt because I have one more
bring
question
forth.
I want to get done.
Okay.
And I interrupt you because I don't disagree with anything that you're saying. I was there on October 7th. The viciousness and the brutality of that attack that triggered this whole thing lies at the feet of this terrorist organization. So you and I are in complete agreement. What I'm asking, and I'm hoping I can get in writing because I really would like to get to my next question, is that we still have strategic and tactical decisions to make, and you will be one of the players at the table. Your affirmation and confirmation that this will be the most important thing, getting a United States citizen home, I hear that, and I'd like to be able to discuss that with you more. The second question I have is that the Jerusalem Post reported that the Trump administration's pivot to Russia is making our allies, including Israel, wary of sharing intelligence, fearing that doing so could expose their assets. There's precedent for this concern. On May 10th, 2017, while meeting with Russia's foreign minister and ambassador to Washington in the Oval Office, Trump shared intelligence about an Islamic State threat with specifics that came from a spy embedded in the terrorist group on behalf of Israel. Israel press reported that Trump's leak had placed that person's life at risk and cut off Israel from his intel. Now, fast forward, yesterday we learned that the highest ranking national security officials in the Trump administration, including the National Security Advisor, the head of the CIA, the Director of National Intelligence, the Secretary of State, and others, discussed sensitive and imminent military operations in a commercial unclassified messaging app and accidentally included a reporter in that chat. This seems to be a pattern and practice of the administration to be using unclassified platforms for these kind of communications. So I deeply value our relationship with Israel. I know you do. Does it concern you that our close ally is now hesitant to share intelligence because they fear the Trump administration and its top intelligence officials can't be trusted and are continuing to get evidence to that effect?
Senator, with appreciation for the question, I can only tell you that I've seen some news reports, but not detailed, and I have no knowledge of what has actually happened. If confirmed, I will work diligently with the President and all of my colleagues to ensure that there is integrity in all that is done. And I have confidence the President will charge me with that responsibility.
Thank you, Governor Huckabee. And I hope we can talk soon about Idan and his horrific reality and getting him home. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Booker. Let's see, Senator Daines.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Governor Huckabee, it's good to see you here this morning, as well as Janet. Good to see you here as well, and our other nominees. Thank you for being before this committee. Governor Huckabee, I want to jump into the issue with Israel. I think this is perhaps the single most important relationship we have on the earth, is a relationship with the United States of America and Israel. If confirmed, you are going to be a terrific ambassador and a very important ambassador who looks at the priorities. I'm grateful for this president and the team he's assembled in terms of the moral clarity they're bringing back to Israel and the Middle East. The world will be a lot safer with this strong leadership coming from the Trump administration. Governor, I was in Israel a month before the October 7th attack. We did not know that was coming. I was there, went to the north, went down in those Hezbollah terror tunnels that don't get a lot of attention, descending some 80 feet down in the ground, extensive tunnel networks, spray painted inside the tunnel. It says, "On our way to Jerusalem," as Hezbollah was using that as a way to infiltrate Israel for an organized attack from the north. There's no question that terrorists and state sponsors like Iran continue to plot for the annihilation of Israel. My question is, how important do you think it is for Israel to normalize relations with U.S. partners like Saudi Arabia. I remember my meeting with Bibi. It was late August. There was great optimism about what's happening with Israel and Saudi Arabia of renormalized relationships. I think it'd be a breakthrough moment in the Middle East, of course, shattered with what happened on October 7th. And I hope and pray that we'll be back to working with the Saudis in seeing Israel and Saudi Arabia normalize their relationship. But how important do you think it is, that link between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and what should our role as the United States be in that regard?
Senator, I appreciate the question. I think the President's made it very clear that it is.
All right, suspend. Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the President has made it very clear that it is one of his highest priorities to bring that level of cooperation.
Mike Huckabee uses Christianity to
All right.
Palestinian homes,
Out.
to take Palestinians off their land.
Mr. Huckabee.
Mr. Chairman, thank you again. The third time is the charm, so let me see if I can do it.
All right.
The President has made it very clear that his goal is to see a real and lasting peace in the entire Middle East. And part of that would have to include the Saudi Arabia government, other governments of the Gulf states, and all those who really do wish to recognize that there is not a threat from Israel toward them. This is a remarkable change in the geopolitical structure, and it is an incredible opportunity. I've used the term that I think that it's possible that this president could achieve something in the Middle East that would have, and I use the term deliberately, biblical proportion. By that I mean that it would be astonishing and incredible to see former enemies, enemies who have fought wars from 1948, 56, 67, 73 and on, to become partners in peace, to share trade, to share economic development, to share tourism and free movement between the nations. It's not easy. It's not going to necessarily be quick. But, Senator, what you have mentioned is exactly what I believe this president is committed to. He's already achieved extraordinary success in his first term. And if confirmed, I look forward to being a part of seeing the next phase of what we know to be the Abraham Accords.
Governor, I can't help but reflect exactly what you said around the optimism we had towards the end of President Trump's first term with the Abraham Accords, the Iranians weakened by the strong sanctions, weakening the bad guys, strengthening the good guys. And then we went through the Biden years where that was absolutely turned on its head. And I'm grateful we returned back to that trajectory that we were on to bring peace back to the Middle East. Governor, I've got significant concerns about the status of foreign military sales sitting in purgatory at the State Department waiting to be fulfilled. Could this committee get your commitment to work towards the completion of the sales that the United States has made to Israel?
Senator, if confirmed, it would be a delight and privilege to work with the Secretary, the President, and the Department of Defense to ensure that we continue the commitment that we've already made. It's not a new commitment. It's a long-standing commitment to the State of Israel. And yes, I would commit to that.
Governor, thank you. Mr. Cabrera, the Cologne Free Zone is the second largest free trade zone in the world, also well known for money laundering and narcotics trafficking. My question, how does this illicit finance in Panama benefit everyone from Hezbollah to Hamas to transnational criminal organizations?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And what I will say is, while I'm not an expert necessarily in that, and as a private citizen, I look forward to, if confirmed, being briefed, I can say that Panama was recently, they've been working with the FBI for some time now, and they were removed from the gray list by the Financial Action Task Force. They still remain on the blacklist by the European Union. But if confirmed, look forward to working with you and with the different agencies that we have to make sure they implement the proper safeguards in their financial systems to make sure that they're not being used for those sorts of things that you're articulating, because it would be very risky for us, for our soldiers abroad, and for our allies as well, if their financial agencies are being used for these sorts of things.
Mr. Cabrera, thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Merkley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you for putting yourselves forward to serve in important positions. And Governor Huckabee, I wanted to touch on a couple points. There are concerns to me, and I don't know if they're concerns of yours, but I thought I would just ask. One of the things that has bothered me a lot is the use of the 2,000-pound bombs in Gaza, because they are, by their very nature, indiscriminate. When they're called in to, even if they're called in to take on a identified Hamas target, the impact is often dozens of people and tens of dozens injured from a single bomb, because the blast crater is so large and the blast radius is huge. Have you had any concerns at all about the use of the 2,000-pound bombs in the areas of Gaza?
Senator, I'm not confirmed, therefore I don't have access to the level of information that you would certainly possess. I would hope that one of the commitments that we could keep to the State of Israel is to ensure that the weapon we provide includes the smart weaponry that can be more accurate.
Okay, that is a different question. I'd really appreciate if you just address. You're basically saying, based on the publicly available information, you currently have no concerns?
I would want to discuss with the President, because an ambassador doesn't get to have
We'll
policies.
move on. I'm trying to give you an opportunity to actually answer questions.
And I'm trying to answer, Senator, but all I can do is tell you
another concern that I've had is the use of humanitarian supplies as leverage, in which they've been restricted time and again. Under international law, this is generally considered an illegitimate strategy of war. Have you had any concerns at all about Israel restricting the supplies of food to Gaza?
They provided 700 trucks a day to go.
Have you had concerns or not? The answer is no. Just tell me no.
Well, I'm doing my best to tell you, Senator, that there have been massive supplies.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on, because that's just not true under the facts. There's been extended periods where very few trucks at all have gotten in, and certainly we did have relief during the ceasefire, but we're now in a new phase of extremely restricted supplies. There's been many, many international organizations that have reported on this, so I know you're not unaware of it. The President has a plan in which he's talked about having Palestinians all forced out of Gaza and into some other set of countries. Do you support that strategy?
Senator, the President has never said that he would force displacement. That has not been his statements nor his policy, but rather to make sure that there is a safe and secure place for people to live during the process of cleaning out what is a disastrous mess.
Which you said would be outside of Gaza. That safe and secure place you said would be outside of Gaza. So are you comfortable with Palestinians, whether they're invited, incentivized, whatever? Do you think that they should be moved out of Gaza?
They shouldn't be forced displacement unless for their own security. But there are 30,000 unexploded ordnance.
So for their own security, they
there.
could be forced out of Gaza then?
I'm sorry, sir.
You said if it's for their own security, they could be forced out of Gaza?
I didn't say they could be forced, and the President has never said that. He has never spoken about forced displacement, but providing for them to find safe haven away from the unexploded ordnances and destruction.
Another issue that has arisen is certainly the idea of Greater Israel, Judea and Samaria. Was that a gavel? I don't think I'm over time yet. All right, thank you.
It was accidental discharge.
Trying to get as many questions as I can in these very few minutes. The Greater Israel, Judea, and Samaria includes the West Bank and Gaza. Do you support the idea, as many as Israelis do, of having a Greater Israel?
Senator, if confirmed, it'll be my duty to carry out the President's policies, not mine. One of the things that I will recognize, an ambassador doesn't create the policy, he carries the policy of his country and his president.
But you have expressed support before for the West Bank being Israeli territory. So have you previously supported the idea of annexation of the West Bank?
I have previously supported it, yes, sir, Judea and Samaria, but it would not be my prerogative to make that the policy of the President.
Yeah. Do you support the annexation of Gaza as well?
Senator, once again, it would be the prerogative of the President.
But you've had previous positions. Have you previously supported the Greater Judea-Samaria vision?
I don't recall having
Final
spoken about
question. I have
Gaza.
15 seconds.
Okay.
Leahy law allows for us to sanction individual units in a foreign military that have been violating human rights. There's been a series of cases involving certain individual IDF units. Should units of IDF that carry out attacks on West Bank villages, Palestinian villages, should they be subject to full examination under the Leahy law, or should Israel be exempted?
I think the President will instruct Secretary Rubio and, frankly, Mr. Rubenstein to my left to make sure that the law is followed. And I think
it's
there
never
are
been
often
followed yet.
accusations.
It's never been
just
applied to Israel, but you think
let
it
me
should
just say
be.
that I think that there are often accusations that Israel is doing things that, as it turns out, they're not. They don't have many friends.
But if they were doing it, you would support the Leahy law being applied as an American standard for supporting human rights?
Senator, I would think that the United States always wants to follow what's right, what's legal, and it would be the President's decision and the Secretary's decision to negotiate with the Israelis on what
Thank you,
exactly
Governor.
that means.
My time's up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. It's a delight to be with all of you. Mr. Huckabee, I can't imagine, on one hand, a more rewarding and on the other hand, a more challenging assignment than what you've been given. And I'm actually very jealous. Utah has a very special relationship with Israel. I like to tease my friends with ties to Israel that until I was 18, I thought I grew up in Zion in Utah. We have a Zion Park, we have a Jordan River, there's just lots of ties. One of those ties is Brigham Young University, sponsored by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that has a campus there. And when I was 18 years old in 1979, I spent 6 months on that campus. At the time, the campus wasn't built. We lived in a kibbutz. And I had the opportunity to be there the day Jimmy Carter signed the peace accord with Israel and Egypt. And I bring that up. I actually have a picture of the Jerusalem Post hanging in my office from that day to show that we can have peace. It's hard. Some gave their lives for that accord. And likewise, President Trump's attempt on the Abraham Accords is equally noteworthy and is important. And so it's clear that Utah, that myself, Brigham Young University, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has this tie. And I don't need to go into the past, but this might be a good opportunity to send a message to Utah about how you feel about our dominant faith. I just didn't know if you would have me carry anything back to Utahns.
Nothing, Senator, let me be very clear, and I appreciate the question and the opportunity. The respect that I have for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is extraordinary because I respect very much the commitment to family, to moral righteousness, to a sense of right and wrong. It's part of what has drawn me to an understanding that Israel, in many ways, is a reflection of our own heritage and history. It is the Judeo-Christian law that there is a right and that there is a wrong, upon which all of Western civilization is built, but certainly our system of government. There is no country across the globe that more mirrors our own struggle and our own level of democracy than does the State of Israel. And it's one of the reasons that it is a natural ally. The spiritual connections between your church, mine, many churches in America, Jewish congregations to the State of Israel, is because we ultimately are people of the book. We believe the Bible. And therefore, that connection is not geopolitical. It is also spiritual. And to ignore that, to deny that, would be to make it very difficult for us to ever understand how to go forward in a relationship with them.
Thank you. I will certainly carry that message back to Utah. And I agree. I can't imagine what I'm not doing now without that spiritual opportunity that I had to understand both Arab, Jew, and Christian in that period of my life. The Brigham Young University has a center over there. It's on the Mount of Olives. I would like to invite you to meet there on the campus as you get your feet underneath you. And if you're okay, I'll help broker that agreement. I think they'd love to have you there and see what they're doing there in Jerusalem.
Senator, just for the record, I have been there.
Oh, excellent, good.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful facility on the Mount of Olives and has one of the most spectacular views of the old city in all of Israel.
Yes, and we'll make sure there's an organ recital on your next visit back there as you do that.
As
Thank
long
you.
as I'm not required to play it.
Yeah. All right, now switching to the Panama Canal. Mr. Cabrera, Panama has announced they're leaving the BRI, and Hong Kong companies with assets on both sides are being divested, addressing some of our serious security concerns. What remaining issues need to be addressed regarding the PRC's influence in the region?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the question. And as you mentioned, in the last 60 days, we've made significant inroads with Secretary Rubio and President Trump in them leaving the Belt and Road Initiative and these two concessions being sold as well, which prior to that, the Panamanian government had started an audit on both. But what I will say is it doesn't just stop there, the influence that China has had within Panama. I think you've seen it as well in cities like Colón, where in the cybersecurity grants that they've given for cameras in the area, you don't know where that cloud's information might be stored, who has access to it. And again, in some of their ports, where they have some cranes that have been given to them by the Chinese government as well. Again, as a county commissioner, we have seen it where many times they'll underbid these sorts of things to try to get their cranes in there by a significant amount, because a lot of these companies are partially government.
And I'm going to, only because I'm out of time,
No.
I'm going to stop you, but I'd also like to put a plug in any influence we can have in getting them to reverse their position to the PRC and be more accommodating for Taiwan, particularly their position on the One China principle. And I regret that you don't have time to answer that, but I'd just like to lay that marker with you.
Thank you. And if confirmed, I look forward to working with you in your office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Curtis. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations to the nominees for your nominations. I especially want to say hello to Governor Huckabee. We served together. He was the chair of the National Governors Association my first year in office, and then also of the Southern Governors Association. And my wife Ann and Janet and Mike did some good work together then. Really quickly, Governor, you know, what I'm looking for in an ambassador to Israel and a policy about the U.S.-Israel relationship is strong support for Israel, condemnation of Hamas, but also a recognition that Palestinians have a right to live, and they have a right to the state that they were promised by the UN in 1947, at a time when the U.S. exercised great leadership under President Truman to promote both a state for Jews, Israel, and a state for Arabs in Palestine. One promise has been met, one promise hasn't been. There's a million reasons for that. But, you know, I think you have some personal points of view that would differ from mine on this, but the point you make is right. You're going to be executing the president's policy, and I know you will do that. I just look for some evidence of a recognition by the administration that just as Israel has a right to survive, Palestinians have a right to live, and Palestinians have a right to what was promised to them in 1947. Just a kind of a message from this side of the dais. The president's suggestion that there might be a Gaza solution that involves either U.S. military presence or sort of U.S. commercial development, to me seems the height of folly. It reminds me of the United States deciding to take over the failed French colonial project in Indochina in 1954. We never should have taken it over. It was disastrous. I think the U.S. will be needed for the very complex task of finding a solution in Gaza, the West Bank, and the region, of course, will be needed. Our resources, our leadership, et cetera. But for us to step into any kind of a takeover role, I think would only court disaster, and I just want to offer that. Mr. Cabrera, I want to ask you a question. You marched with the Proud Boys at an event in Coral Gables, Florida in 2018, and in your conversations with committee staff, you said that you were not really aware of who they were, and you described that march really motivated by your strong support for Cuban democracy. Recognizing that statement that you made to committee staff, will you condemn the Proud Boys and their ideology here before the committee?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I will say that I condemn anybody that espouses any sort of hate. I've said it before in my editorial in front of the Miami Herald, not just here in the United States, but anywhere in the world. I think there's no place for that, and I think we have to work together, and I think it would make for a better world.
Can you say you condemn the Proud Boys and mention them by name sitting here before this committee?
I condemn them and any other group that might espouse any sort of hate around the world.
Thank you for stating that. Mr. Rubenstein, in March of 2024, you posted on LinkedIn that, quote, K-12 teachers are almost all products of extreme left teachers training programs in the colleges. Then the same leftist anti-Semite professors provide summer training on MENA and other issues. The system is not fixable. A lot of us on the committee have parents, spouses, kids who are K-12 teachers, who work in education programs training K-12 teachers. A lot of us, like me, were governors appointing boards of universities with intimate knowledge of teacher training programs. There can be a bad apple in any organization, but I got to say, I read a comment like that about K-12 teachers are almost all products of extreme left-wing teacher training programs, and it strikes me along the lines of what Senator Shaheen was asking is kind of a political fantasy or a conspiracy that doesn't really seem like the kind of thing that a careful lawyer offering narrow advice would say. You know, I think lawyers usually have narrow brushes in the paint kit and not only big, broad brushes to smear everyone. How can I square a comment like that with your suggestion that you're going to provide careful and narrow legal advice should you be confirmed?
Thank you for that question, Senator. As it happens, I too am the product of a public school teacher that mentioned.
Oh, your microphone, sir.
Thank you for that question, Senator. As it happens, I too am a product of a public school teacher. My mom, who I mentioned, taught in the Detroit public school system for almost 5 decades. The post that you're referring to, again, is advocacy, not legal advice. There's a difference, number one. Number two, when I went to the Department of Education, and this has nothing to do with the Department of State, but I'm addressing your question, it gave me a real window into what's happening in the state of U.S. education. I was not an education lawyer. I was sent there to run the office, which I did, and to take care of some other things that we also did related, primarily to China and whatnot. And in talking to the people there and observing kind of the flow of things coming into the office of the General Counsel, we began to see issues arising. And the way it was expressed, both by career, mostly by political, but also by some of the careers, is that the way that we train teachers in this country has some real issues, and that often teacher colleges in public education are very ideological.
I'm over my time, so let me just conclude and say this. Now you're giving a careful answer. There are some issues. There are some circumstances. Not virtually everybody is a victim of left-wing indoctrination. And I will just conclude by saying what you hear within the Department of Education here might look very different, spending time around the country and in the schools that actually train our K-12 teachers, and that wouldn't be your future job, but I would encourage you to spend some time outside of Washington. With that, I yield back.
Senator, I would agree with you that I would agree with you that our teachers, have a very hard job, and they do the best that they can.
Thank you very much, Senator Kane. Next up is Senator Hagerty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. And first, I want to congratulate all 3 of you on your nominations, and I want to thank you for your willingness to serve our great nation. If you're confirmed, each of you are going to play critically important roles in advancing our nation's and our President's foreign policy. And that policy will make a marked difference at a point in time where I think we're literally at a turning point as a nation and a world. First, Mr. Cabrera, I'd like to start with you to talk about drug trafficking in the Panama region. Transnational criminal organizations from countries like Colombia and Mexico have long used Panama to smuggle illicit drugs, and they've done it to the tune of billions of dollars. Last year alone, the State Department estimates that up to 40% of cocaine that was produced in Colombia had transited through the exclusive economic zones of Panama. And for far too long, these transnational criminal organizations have acted with impunity. They've been able to make billions of profits and they've done this, bringing these drugs into our own borders. Panama can play an outsized role in cooperating with the United States in seizing these illicit drugs, and they can also cooperate with us to dramatically scale down these organizations, these transnational criminal organizations' operations. And if you're confirmed, Mr. Cabrera, do you commit to use all of the tools at your disposal to ensure that the Panamanian government continues to collaborate with the United States in taking strong actions against these criminal organizations and stopping the flow of illicit drugs into America?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I'll say that this issue is another one where we've had great success in these past 60 days. Since Secretary Rubio visited in January and February, we've seen 95% less crossings on the Darien Gap. And why do I mention the Darien Gap? A lot of these drugs that are coming in go through the Darien Gap. This is an area where you had, over 2 years ago, over 500,000 folks crossing. When we talk about the southern border, those 500,000 people are crossing on their way to our southern border. So in these past 2 months, we've had significant inroads where 95% decreases. As you mentioned, 40% of the cocaine in this country comes through Panama. But Panama, I will say, is a great ally in this. They've been our #1 in seizing drugs, over 100 metric tons the last 4 years in a row. They've been #1 in Central America. We've been a good ally in helping them get helicopters and boats and so on so they can compete with some of these traffickers. But again, there's always room for improvement, but they've been a great ally in this and look forward to continuing that and using all the tools that are at our disposal to continue to making sure that we stop as many metric tons of drugs coming through that border, through the Darien Gap. And again, it goes hand in hand with migration is what I would say.
Kevin, I hope you're confirmed, and I want you to know that the resources of my office will be available to you once you are ambassador, to the extent we can help you at all, because this is a critical mission that we've got to deal with.
Thank you, Senator. I look forward to working with you at your office if confirmed.
Certainly. Governor Huckabee, it's wonderful to see you here. You're somebody I've long admired. I appreciate our friendship. I must say you're one of the best communicators that I've ever had a chance to work with, and what a beautiful skill set to bring to such a critical role as being our next ambassador to Israel. In President Trump's first term, he stood by Israel in a way that was unprecedented, and he did it in a way that weakened our mutual enemies, and he did it all while avoiding a costly war. If you think about what happened, he moved our embassy to Jerusalem. He acknowledged Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and he acknowledged and negotiated the historic Abraham Accords. He did all of this despite the pearl clutching in Washington without a single war. We also withdrew from the disastrous JCPOA, and we implemented maximum pressure on Iran at a time that was absolutely critical. I participated in that, getting the Japanese government to stop buying Iranian crude oil. It happened around the world. Guess what happened? Iran was broke. Then something changed. The administration changed. The Biden administration came in, waived the sanctions, stopped enforcing the sanctions on Iran. Iran became rich again. They began to talk in ways that created distance and daylight between America and its ally Israel. And I think that had a great deal to do with emboldening Hamas, emboldening Iran, and leading up to the October 7th, 2023 attacks. I'd just like to hear your viewpoint, Governor Huckabee, in the event that you're confirmed, of how important it is to you that the United States stand arm in arm with Israel and not show any daylight between ourselves and our ally.
Senator, thank you. A wonderful question and an opportunity for me to remind everyone that it was during President Trump's first term that there really was peace. There was peace in the Middle East. He did extraordinary things to show our relationship to Israel in recognizing Jerusalem as the eternal indigenous capital of the Jewish people. When he moved the embassy, basically the entire world told him not to do it, that the world would blow up if he did it. He did it. I happened to be with him one-on-one about 2 weeks after he made that decision and announced it. I'll never forget, Senator, what he said to me, because I asked him, why did you do it? Everyone told you not to. The world leaders, people in government positions, they all said, don't do it. You did it. Why? I'll never forget. He looked at me very simply and said, because I said I would, and it was the right thing to do. And Senator, that's why I am honored and privileged to be able to be named by this president to serve in this capacity, because I like his sense of clarity when it comes to the moral issue of standing with an ally And right now, Israel needs an ally. And frankly, let me add, the Jewish people need to know they have friends. There's a long line of enemies that the Jewish people experience across this globe, and sadly, on some of our own university campuses. It's going to be a privilege to be able to be one of those people, not Jewish, Christian in fact, but to say to our Jewish friends, you will never go through what you've gone through alone. We will stand not behind you, we will stand with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. I want to associate myself with the remarks of Senator Shaheen, her opening remarks. Governor Huckabee, it was good to get together with you yesterday. I only get 5 minutes in this forum, so if you could keep your answers short. I'm just going to ask your views on certain principles, and it is absolutely true that the Jewish state needs a friend. I think you also recognize that there are many in the Jewish community here in the United States who disagree with the views that you've expressed with respect to certain issues in Israel. And I do want to ask you about some of those, because you are seen as a big hero of the Jewish settler movement on the West Bank. You supported the idea of Israeli annexation of the West Bank, as you've confirmed here today. So I want to know where you draw the line. I recognize that you will be the president's emissary, but you've made a lot of comments on this, so I'm interested in your thoughts. Do you agree with me that it would be wrong for a Jewish settler to push a Palestinian family off land on the West Bank that was owned by that Palestinian family? Do you agree with that?
Senator, thanks for the question. I think there are a lot of things attributed to me that aren't necessarily 100% accurate. I'm sure you would, if you've experienced that a time or two in your career.
That's why I'm trying to clarify. I'm asking some very simple questions.
A very simple question.
I'll give
you a very simple answer. I believe that there has to be always the law being followed, and there has to be clarity. I also believe that it won't be my policy that will be implemented in the Middle East. It will be that of the president.
So this was a very simple question, Governor.
Yes, sir.
So we have a Palestinian family on the West Bank today. They own the land they're on. My question to you is, do you agree that it would be wrong for a Jewish settler to push that family off their land? Yes or no?
If we're talking about stealing the land, taking it away from them?
Their land, yes.
That's a problem. If you're talking about purchasing the land, that's a legitimate transaction that...
Okay, so when you said in 2017, and I quote, Israel has title deed to Judea and Samaria, unquote, you did not mean it gave Israel the right to kick Palestinians off their lands in the West Bank. Am I right about that?
Senator, I've never indicated that that was a part of that. I simply referenced the biblical mandate that goes all the way back to the time of Abraham, 3,500 years ago, and that's what I was referencing.
Right. No, I understand you have that view, but I'm trying to understand the consequences of that view. So in your view, if Israel were to annex the West Bank, what rights would Palestinians have? Because when I asked you that question yesterday, you focused on the right to work, economic opportunity. So my question today is, would those Palestinian individuals in an annexed West Bank have the same legal and democratic rights as Israeli Jews living in the West Bank?
Annexation does not mean displacement of people.
No, I'm not asking about displacement right now. I'm asking if they remained there, would they have equal rights to Israeli Jews living on the West Bank?
There would be security. There would be opportunity.
That's not what I'm asking.
Okay.
Governor. You know that.
No, I'm
So I'm asking whether they would have
understand.
equal legal rights, whether they would have the same legal rights as a Israeli Jew who settled on the West Bank living side by side. Would they have the same legal and political rights?
Senator, if you mean would they be able to live freely, they already do.
How about voting? You're suggesting that the West Bank become part of Israel. Are you suggesting that Palestinians living in the West Bank should have the right then to vote in elections in Israel?
Senator, let me correct and say I'm not suggesting.
Let me move on.
Carry out the policies of the president.
I do want to ask you about the situation in Gaza because I think you would agree that it would be wrong to hold any innocent Palestinian civilian accountable for the evils of Hamas, right? I mean, that's just a simple principle. You don't believe in collective punishment, do you?
Senator, I don't believe in collective punishment. Right. If the Palestinians in Gaza have participated in the holding of hostages and in the torture,
right,
then
so
they've got culpability.
But there are 2 million people right there. And Senator Merkley asked you earlier about withholding food, because for 23 days there has been a ban on humanitarian assistance into Gaza. Finance Minister Smotrich suggested, and I'm quoting, it might be justified and moral to starve 2 million Palestinians in Gaza as part of a strategy to free the hostages. Simple question. Do you disagree with Finance Minister Smotrich?
Senator, as you know, an ambassador doesn't get to argue with the people of the country he goes to represent the United States in.
Right.
But my job is to represent the president and his policies. Right. And he has not given those to me because I've not been confirmed.
I understand. You are aware, are you not, Governor, that when he was asked whether the Palestinians who would leave Gaza under the president's plan could return, he said no. That doesn't sound like a voluntary program, does it?
What I've heard the president say is he does not push for forced displacement. I've also heard him say he wants a better life for the Palestinian people. He wants them to have security. He doesn't want their children to be put in front of the munitions of Hamas as they have.
Nobody does, Governor, but that's not the question.
But that's
I see
what
the
the
time's up.
president has said.
We did have I thought, an important conversation yesterday about the situation of some of the churches in Jerusalem and Israel who are feeling a lot of financial pressure because of actions being taken by municipalities in Israel, as well as a concern they have about a bill in the Knesset. You remember that conversation?
Yes, sir.
And
Senator,
you agree that we should work together on that issue, right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
I'm up, so to our nominees, congratulations. We're glad to have you here. And I'll start with you, Governor Huckabee. It was good to have a chance to meet with you. And a couple weeks ago, Dina and I, as you did, went to Israel. Soon after October 7th, we saw firsthand the horrific brutality that occurred there. And I think we also share with you an optimism that in this second term of President Trump's presidency that we'll be able to pick up some of the wonderful progress of the Abraham Accords and move forward. But recently we've seen the decisive action of President Trump directed against the Houthis, which terrorize Israel, are terrorizing the shipping lanes, directly attacking U.S.-flagged vessels. And I wondered if you could speak for a minute about how you would imagine working hand in hand with the administration, but also Israel, to confront that threat.
Senator, thank you, and it's great to see you. What the president has made clear is that the United States is not going to be played for a chump. We're not going to allow the Houthis to bombard our naval capacity, stop shipping lanes. The president has made it very clear that America has every right to defend our interest and to stand by our allies. And it's one of the reasons that I feel so extraordinarily grateful to this president for the opportunity to serve in the capacity to which he has nominated me. And if confirmed, I want to be able to take the clarity of his voice and moral understanding of what should happen in the Middle East in dealing with terrorism and being able to be part of something historic, to stop that which has murdered and destroyed the lives and livelihoods, not only of soldiers, but of civilians.
Thank you, Governor. Also, to follow up on the progress of the Abraham Accords, as you know, that peace treaty was really the most significant in 40 years. It laid the predicate for an expansion of peace throughout the region, which was sadly disrupted by the vicious attack by Hamas. How do you imagine working with other countries in the region, and with Israel, of course, to expand the Abraham Accords over the next 4 years of President Trump's presidency?
Senator, that's a great question because everyone in all the region has everything to gain and nothing to lose by working cooperatively. If one looks at the agricultural advances that Israel has made and their willingness to share them with all of these other nations that are basically deserts. In my 52 years of traveling to Israel, I've literally seen the verses of the Bible come to life. The dry bones have come to live again, and the desert has bloomed because of Israeli advancement in hydrology, being able to use water in a way that literally turned deserts into vast array of vegetation, which now exports fruits and vegetables everywhere. Look at the technology that could be shared, which creates a greater level of security. And of course, whether it's trade, tourism, no one loses then, everyone wins. Nobody is looking at taking somebody else's territory and moving into their sovereignty. At that point, it becomes an opportunity to bring a real sense of peace for all of the people of the Middle East, whether they are of Jewish or Arab descent. And that would be something that I believe this president could uniquely bring about.
Thank you. Mr. Cabrera, welcome. Just following up on the enormous attention and focus that this administration, Secretary Rubio and the President has put on Panama and the canal. For too long, I think it's clear to all that Beijing has strengthened its presence throughout the world, throughout Latin America, but particularly in Panama, and that's to the detriment of our economic security and our national security. But thanks to this administration, the Panamanian government's withdrawing from the Belt and Road Initiative, we now see a path towards U.S. investors owning port concessions and the Panama Canal and a controlling interest. If confirmed, how do you expect to work and how do you plan to work with this administration to deepen those gains of pushing China back, but also strengthening our ties with Panama, which is such a key and important ally?
Thank you for your question, Senator. And I think, this is part of economic diplomacy. I think it's important, while we are already #1 in foreign direct investment into Panama, it's important that we continue to expand that. Work with the Panamanian government, who are great allies in migration, in stopping drugs, through the Darien Gap, and make sure we expand that relationship to make sure that we have a level playing field for American companies to come in, be able to compete fairly. And when they compete, they win, and it's because we have a better product to offer. And I think, again, we can continue on the gains that we've had these past 60 days with President Trump and Secretary Rubio. But again, I think that the Chinese influence is not just in the canal. It's also in other areas. I know that they have memorandums of understanding with all 5 public universities in Panama for Confucius Centers. And they also have a relationship with the local government-owned TV, Sur TV, where they provide information which many times is put in it definitely never criticizes China, what goes on the information they pass along. So again, I think much progress has been made, and looking forward to, if confirmed, working with you, working with the members of this committee, Secretary Rubio and the President, to continue to diminish Chinese influence while providing opportunities for American companies to invest in Panama.
Indeed. You have a lot of work to do. Thank you. Thank you all. Senator Rosen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the Chair and Ranking Member for holding this important hearing today, and I want to thank the nominees and their families for their willingness to serve. Governor Huckabee, I know from our conversation earlier, like me, you care deeply about the bonds between the United States and Israel. I have no doubt that if confirmed, you will work tirelessly to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship, meet Israel's defense needs, and free all of the remaining hostages held by Hamas. What I do have concerns about, however, is how you will work to maintain a bipartisan U.S. support for Israel, and whether you will encourage steps that could one day lead to a durable, lasting peace in the region that finally provides Israel with long-term security. So, Governor Huckabee, to have any chance of achieving what I just laid out, Israel cannot turn into a partisan football here on Capitol Hill. We've already had this discussion. Do you agree with that? And if so, will you commit to maintaining an ongoing, equal communication with both Republican and Democratic offices, if confirmed?
Senator, thank you, and it's a very important and valid question to which I can say emphatically that I affirm a commitment that if I am confirmed, I would have a responsibility. It's not just that I would do it because it would be a nice thing to do. It's a responsibility of an ambassador to serve the entire country, certainly to serve the president who appoints me, the policies of this president and the secretary, but it's also a duty to communicate. And it's a conversation that I also had with Ranking Member Shaheen yesterday and committed to her that there would be no difference in the manner in which I would receive a call from someone who's a Democrat or Republican.
Thank you.
Quite frankly, if I could add one thing.
Yes, and I have another question.
Just real quickly, that I can remember the day when the Democrats were the most reliable supporters of Israel in this
and
city.
they still are, sir.
Well,
so I'm going to move to my
will be.
next question. Based on your previous statements, I do think it's fair to say you're opposed to a two-state solution. So while we both agree that two states living side by side in peace, it's not possible today, particularly with Hamas still in power in Gaza, but I firmly believe this should remain the ultimate goal and inform the U.S. approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, especially after the war in Gaza ends. It's in both Israel's best security interest to reach such an agreement, and the only way to maintain Israel as a Jewish democratic state for the long term. We're in it for the long run. And so given this, do you believe that the U.S. should continue advocating for a future two-state solution? And if not, what is your alternative?
Senator, it's a good question. And quite frankly, I think the question is not, is there a need for people who are Palestinian to be able to live and have a future? The question is where and when. Where will that be? Will it be on top of the Israeli Jewish state? Or will it be somewhere that is decided upon that would be completely different, only for those who wish to locate there? And here's my point. Senator, Israel is a tiny little strip of land. You know that. We all do. It's a size of New Jersey. But Muslim countries control 644 times the amount of land that Israel has. They've been surrounded by those who have sought to destroy it, annihilate it. Those who chant from the river to the sea are not bringing about peace. The Palestinians were given the opportunity in the year 2000 when Ehud Barak from Israel put everything on the table, virtually said, 100%, here it is, you get it all, and the Palestinian Liberation Organization walked away from it. The other thing that has to happen is a cultural shift. There can be no peace and two-state solution if there continues to be education from the time a child is 5 and 6 years old living under the Palestinian Authority that says it's okay, in fact, it's desirable to murder Jews and to reward them for it.
I want to build on what we talked about. You spoke earlier about the Abraham Accords, how important that is because a cultural shift, Abraham Accords, and other kinds of diplomacy can help lead to that cultural shift. And you and I both agree that Iran presents a major threat to Israel's existence, and the growth of the Abraham Accords is one of the best ways to counter Iranian aggression and start that cultural shift, if you will. So given that a two-state solution central to the Saudis and other Arab partners, and in this broader conversation, I'm running out of time, so maybe you'll let him answer, Chairwoman. How do you propose we expand the Abraham Accords absent of support for a two-state solution?
Through the long process of seeing the culture change. There has to be an admission that Israel has a right to exist. There has to be some recognition that there will be a change in the policy of educating children to hate Jews. That does not lead toward a peaceful coexistence anywhere at any time. And we're seeing the results of that anti-Semitism here in our homeland, which is very distressing to me, I'm sure to you too, Senator, to see people who are raised up with an irrational hatred toward Jewish people. And that cannot lead to any level of peaceful coexistence, whether it's here, there, or anywhere else on the planet.
Madam Chair.
Senator Scott.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Rubenstein, we talked about this a little bit. Can you give me, here's the issue that bothered me a few years ago. I could not get the, through the Secretary of State, them to make sure we got rid of immunity for suing PAHO. As you probably know, PAHO is, I guess, some sort of sister organization to WHO. And what was happening is Cuban doctors and Cuban nurses are being sent around the world and then they were paid a certain amount of money to the Cuban government, and then the doctors and nurses got a pittance of that. To me, I think that's human trafficking. I never could get, under the first Trump administration, I never could get the waiver of immunity. And so I don't know if you've had any time to think about that and what you think about that and whether that's right. But I think human trafficking is wrong, and I think anything to help the Cuban regime is not good for the United States. I don't think you think so.
That's twice. Thank you, Senator, and thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I very much appreciate and enjoyed our conversation. Yes, I agree with you. Human trafficking is wrong. I further understand your frustration. As I explained, over the course of my career, I have done perhaps more than kind of the normal amount of victim of terrorism representation. So I feel these issues, very strongly. I do not know the circumstances of what occurred and what was going on when you requested the information. I have not been read into the facts. I would want to take a look and understand what the institutional position was and what was going on. But I pledged to you then, and I pledge to you now, that I will always communicate with you or any other member of the committee and provide as much information as lawfully I'm able to provide.
At least for me, the most frustrating thing is just a black hole. A lot of in my time up here is you ask people information from the executive branch, and it just goes. We're working, it's like so. But all right, Governor Huckabee, can you tell us why is the defense of Israel, the support of Israel, important to America?
Senator, a great question. The truth is, it's been very clear, as expressed by the Iranian government, that Israel is the appetizer and we're the entree. They don't want to stop at Israel. They certainly want to annihilate them. They've said it over and over, and there's an old saying that when people are saying again and again they're going to kill you, you might want to take them seriously. But they've also gone beyond saying they want to annihilate Israel and wipe it off the face of the earth. They've said that their ultimate goal is to first take care of the little Satan, they identify as Israel, and then come after the great Satan. Senator, that's us. And whatever is happening to Israel, it is the canary in the coal mine. These governments, Iran being the most notable, who want to develop a nuclear weapon and who have the audacity to wish to use it to destroy a sovereign Jewish state so that they ultimately could destroy Western civilization. That's why it matters, Senator, and I appreciate your question because I hope people will understand this is not just about Israel. It is about us. And if we don't stand with them, they stand alone. And if they fall alone, we fall next.
Thank you. Commissioner Cabrera, as we've seen, I know you've put a lot of effort into freedom and liberty in Latin America. As we've seen in Panama, the Communist Party has tried to infiltrate all the politics, the port and all those things. So how important is Panama to America, to our trade, to our defense, to our success?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I will say that Panama is a very important ally because we talk a lot about the southern border, but when you talk about the southern border, you can't really talk about it without Panama. Because through the Darien Gap, just a year ago, you had over 500,000 folks crossing. Right now, under the success of President Trump and Secretary Rubio, we've been able to lower those numbers in January and February of this year, 95%. Again, that's not just migration, but that's drugs as well. Panama is a huge ally in drug seizing as well. They've been #1 4 years in a row in Central America, over 100 metric tons, and 40% of the cocaine that enters America enters through Panama. So again, if we have a strong ally in Panama, we have a strong border in the Darien Gap, and making sure that we stop the drugs, we stop the migration, that helps us at the southern border and helps America make sure these drugs aren't infiltrating. But again, that Chinese influence that you mentioned is also a problem. And it's about making sure we continue to make great strides like Secretary Rubio and President Trump have done with the concessions being sold at the port, with them exiting Belt and Road, being the first country to enter Belt and Road and being the first country to exit it in Central America, and making sure we provide opportunities for American companies to be treated fairly in Panama so they can continue to be the largest foreign direct investment.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Governor Huckabee. Congratulations on your nomination. You're going to do a fantastic job, and I'm very happy to see you named for this position. As you know, you're stepping into a role that's not just incredibly important, but it's also incredibly influential. In addition to implementing President Trump's policy, you will oversee what information gets sent back to Washington, D.C. Those assessments get sent to administration officials and members of this committee. Indeed, this committee requires the State Department to submit a range of regular reports and relies on those reports to advance our oversight of the department and American foreign policy. And as you know, you're going to have your work cut out for you. During the Biden administration, such reports were often withheld, and when they were sent, they were systematically politicized to promote the administration's misguided Middle East policy, which boosted America's enemies and punished our allies. Officials in the Trump administration are just beginning to clear the shelves of what was left over. I am holding right now a report produced mostly during the Biden administration. It covers Palestinian Authority incitement of violence against Israelis for the period of February 2023 to May 2024, which includes the aftermath of the October 7th terrorist attacks. It was deliberately withheld from Congress and only sent to this committee this month. It is unclassified, but it hasn't been made public. It is a deeply disturbing example of the challenge you will face and the thinking inside parts of the State Department. This report says that Palestinian President Abbas, quote, President Abbas maintained a public position against incitement of violence and terrorism and reiterated his commitment to nonviolence. He condemned the killing of Israeli civilians by Hamas on October 7th because it had given Israel the pretext to attack Gaza. Let's put aside the disgusting claim that Israel's campaign against Hamas was done on a pretext. The claim that Abbas has not incited violence is staggering. In reality, in relation to October 7th, he and other Palestinian officials blamed Israel and used rhetoric about Palestinian self-defense. A month after the attack, a top Abbas advisor even bragged that the Palestinian Authority had not uttered a single word condemning Hamas. I'd like to ask you, Governor, talk a little bit about your own assessment regarding Palestinian incitement and what that should mean to American foreign policy towards Israel in the region.
Senator, I think the question is very relevant to what's happening right now. The great tragedy is that it's hard to have a peaceful solution that involves a future for the Palestinians when they quench any hope of real democracy for their people. Abbas is now in the 20th year of his 4-year term. As we think about that, one has to ask, how many years does a person get for a 4-year term without an election, without some transfer of power, without empowering the people to speak for themselves? That's part of the real challenge that is faced in the Middle East. With the ongoing doctrine where compensation is given to those who murder Jews, parks and streets are named for those who do it, pensions are given to the families of those who are killed in the line of killing Jews. Senator, that's a difficult pathway to peace. I would further just mention that if, in fact, there is going to be a peaceful direction, we have to accept that something isn't working. And the two-state solution, the notion that everyone's going to live together, toast marshmallows around the campfire, singing Kumbaya, and it's going to happen in our lifetime, is not going to happen if one of the sides doesn't believe the other one has a right to exist and continues to say, from the river to the sea. And so that's why it becomes a challenge. I have every confidence that Secretary Rubio, and especially every confidence that President Trump, wants to see a genuine, long-lasting peace for everyone in the Middle East. and it will be a privilege to serve the President to try to work toward that.
Thank you, Governor. I agree with that. I would note, Mr. Rubenstein, this was not the only report that the Biden administration failed to turn over. I also have a report that I had drafted language requiring the State Department to send this committee a report on, quote, any Iranian person that has attacked a United States citizen using a drone. They sat on that report. We just got that as well. And so I will say, in your role as a legal advisor, you're likewise going to have challenges getting the State Department to comply with the requirements Congress has placed upon them.
Thank you, Senator. And I want to thank you for the introduction. And if I could, for just 15 seconds, I want to thank and be sure you're properly recognized for what you did for the victims of Fort Hood. I spent years on that case. I know more about it, frankly, than anybody would ever want to. It is one of the more shameful episodes in the history of our military, and you led the fight to make it right. And God bless you for what you did. With respect to the reports that you mentioned, again, I'm not in there. I can't tell you exactly what's going in, but I can promise we will take a look at it.
Terrific.
Senator Cruz, I would just say I appreciate you raising those reports. I have not seen them, so I hope you'll share them with the rest of the
We'll happily share them with you.
Thank you. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to all of you for being here and for your willingness to serve. Mr. Rubenstein, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay. The legal advisor to the State Department is a very important position, and it's unique in the sense that it deals, of course, with the unique interaction between domestic law and also with the tangled web that we sometimes refer to as international law. It's long been my view that international law and any associated agreements are made legitimate, are made binding if and only if they've been enacted into law in some way or another, either through ratification of a treaty with 2/3 of the Senate assenting to such an arrangement, or through some other form of legislation, which requires bicameral passage followed by presentment to the President. But in the absence of this, in the absence of domestic implementing legislation, either in the form of treaty ratification or the enactment of a statute, do you share the view that international agreements are not otherwise binding on the United States?
Thank you, Senator. That is a very interesting question. You are absolutely right. The legal advisor's position is one of the great lawyer jobs in the federal government, if not in the world, precisely because it raises the sort of issues that you're touching upon. I can't tell you, as I sit here today, what the institutional view is with respect to your question. And I would certainly, before I committed to anything, want to understand where the institution's view is.
As you read the Constitution, is there?
So as I read the Constitution,
another way around it?
For example, under the Constitution, the treaty power, the authorities case, I believe that Senator Cruz played a role in the Medellin case. There's a very complex and deep discussion of the difference between self-executing and non-self-executing treaties, which have different effect. And historically, as I understand it, going back to the time of the founding, there was an understanding and a discussion about precisely what those means and how they fit under the Constitution. My friend Steve Engel did a tremendous analysis of the executive's authority to unilaterally withdraw from treaties, a question which I know is of interest to the minority. He issued an opinion in 2020 with respect to the Open Skies Agreement that does his usual good work in analyzing the issues and exploring the history and so forth. All of this to say, I have my own views, which are in some cases well-informed, in some cases not so much. I think that there's an ongoing conversation about this. Congress has its view of, for example, its authority to terminate treaties, and Mr. Engel had his, and would have to take it the specific facts, the specific enactment.
Okay, but yeah, let's get a little bit more specific then. If I'm right, and I think I am because I think it's what the Constitution says, then that would suggest that the United States is bound to the United Nations only insofar as domestic law says so. Domestic law meaning ratified treaty or otherwise enacted legislation. If that's the case, our domestic law clearly has delineated how we interact with UN agencies, UN entities that grant entrance to the Palestinian state. We do not fund them. But in the past, people in the position to which you've been nominated, legal advisors to the State Department, have circumvented this prohibition that is mandated by our domestic law by calling the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change a treaty rather than a UN-affiliated body, for example. Now, if domestic law supersedes international law, is this a distinction with any relevance?
Well, I think manifestly under the Constitution, domestic law transcends international law. The United States historically acknowledges and recognizes, for example, international, customary international law. The Department of Defense and the Department of State during the Trump administration and before did lengthy analyses of, for example, the law of war and a variety of the different issues that come up in that frame. But again, how any given set of circumstances, and I can talk a little bit about the Palestinian funding, perhaps more than folks want to know.
My time's about to elapse, and Madam Chair, if I may just ask one quick follow-up on this. I want to make sure I understand the point you made a minute ago about how the United States recognizes customary international law. It's an important statement. It's an important statement to understand. Because insofar as we're willing to say, we recognize customary international law, whatever that might say, we're it. We've granted it. Separate and apart from the fundamental constitutional problem of whether customary international law has evolved in a way that domestic law has never countenanced, I would also be worried about that for the additional reason that there is no single universal arbiter of what customary international law is.
That's correct.
It changes by its very nature.
I agree with you 100%. But I do know, as I said, there is a long institutional history. The lawyers there are careful and thoughtful. I would want to be able to examine it and discuss it with my colleagues and kick it on important issues. I like to take the OLC's temperature because they provide a wonderful pressure test for analysis and ideas and are very good at it, saying, hey, you didn't really think about this issue, or maybe you thought about it from this frame. I will say this. The President has made it very clear that the Department is, and quite rightly so in my view, the President has made it crystal clear that we are to pursue an America First foreign policy. He has issued executive orders dealing with very specifically with the U.S. relationship with international organizations. My role is to execute on those, and we will. He has, as I believe Mr. Landau was before you, and he testified that international agreements, international organizations can advance U.S. interests, and often do, stipulate to that. But the test, right, they're not ends in and of themselves. They are tools to an end, which is making America, to use the Secretary's phrase, making America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. And the legal issues you raise, I look forward to a conversation. I had the great privilege to read, actually, a brief written in the 1970s relative to impoundment, written by your father.
Was it any good?
You are a senator and you are voting on my potential nomination. So I'm going to say it was excellent, but it was excellent. It was outstanding.
That was the right answer.
Thank you. It was outstanding. And I look forward, I hope we are able to have these conversations. I find them educational, exciting, and that helps us get to the right outcome for the American people, which is the most important thing.
Wonderful. I will go back and read that brief and look forward to
It's
future
terrific.
conversations.
I highly recommend it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator.
Well, Mr. Rubenstein, I'm glad you're as oblique with Senator Lee as you were with me. Nice to know it's bipartisan. I have another couple of questions before we close. The first is for you, Governor Huckabee. And again, we discussed this a little bit yesterday when we met, but as you know, what happens in Israel doesn't just affect Israel, it also affects the region. And in neighboring Syria, as we discussed, I think there is an historic opportunity to build a stable, hopefully democratic, but certainly prosperous future that is very different from the Assad regime of the last 50-plus years. But I'm very concerned that there are reports that there are ongoing communications between Russia and Syria, also between Iran and Syria, but particularly Russia, that if we don't seize this moment, Russia may again embed itself with the new authorities in a way that is not going to be in the long-term best interest either of Syria or the United States or the region, I would assert. So can you talk a little bit about how you think we can work with Israel to achieve a Syria that's no longer subject to Russian influence?
Senator, an excellent question and quite timely. As I said to you yesterday, there are people who want a stable Syria more than anyone in the world, the Israelis, particularly the mothers and the fathers of those 18-year-old men and women who have just been drafted into the military and who, God forbid, are going to have to go to yet another theater of war on their border. It is in the world's best interest to see their stability there, but it is in Israel's immediate interest to see that happen. And I'm confident that the President will do everything in his power to see that to fruition.
And can I assume from that that you would encourage that direction and encourage the President to think about the opportunities that we have right now in Syria?
Senator, it's my view that the President would encourage me to think in that direction. Generally, it's hard to get in front of him. It's usually necessary to get behind what he's already thought. And I'm convinced and confident, again, I don't have a conversation till I'm confirmed. I won't be able to have that kind of conversation. But it would not surprise me at all if that's already on his agenda to make happen.
Well, I would certainly agree with you with respect to actions in Israel. However, the President does seem to be falling prey to the manipulation of Vladimir Putin and reciting the Russian talking points. And if Russia's interested in getting back into Syria, I would hope that we would not pay attention to what Russia wants and would pay attention to what the United States wants. Mr. Cabrera, I appreciate your calling up the importance of Panama withdrawing from the Belt and Road Initiative. I agree that's been a huge accomplishment in the first few months of this administration. But I am also concerned about the comments, the inflammatory rhetoric, as I said in my opening statement, that the President has used in talking about reclaiming the Panama Canal. So can I just ask, if confirmed as ambassador to Panama, do you commit to respecting the sovereignty of Panama and to advising the President to do the same?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the question. And what I'll say is it's an honor to be nominated to be the ambassador to Panama. And if confirmed with your consent, we would serve at the President's pleasure. And he has said, as our Commander-in-Chief, his job is to make sure the security and safety of our country and our national security interests. And he said all the options are on the table, right, regarding the Chinese influence in Panama. But what I will say is part of all of the options includes diplomacy, which I think is where we've seen gains in these first 60 days. And if confirmed, again, I look forward to working with President Trump and Secretary Rubio and the Panamanian government to continue to make these gains to diminish that Chinese influence. And working with your office as well and with the members of this committee and having an open dialogue and continuing forward.
Well, I appreciate that and the importance of focusing on diplomacy. And that's why it's hard for me to understand exactly what the President means when he talks about reclaiming the Panama Canal and how those actions would be consistent with our treaty obligations. Can you shed any light on that? What is he talking about when he says, are we talking about sending boots on the ground in the military into Panama to take back the canal? Are we talking about buying it back again? Are we talking about coercing the Panamanians to give it back to us? What do you think? What have your conversations been about what the intent is with respect to the Panama Canal?
Thank you, Senator, and I appreciate the question. And my conversations have been limited as a private citizen. Obviously, I'm not as privy to whatever intel or information they might have regarding the extent of Chinese influence. But President Trump has articulated pretty clearly, and Secretary Rubio in his first trip, it's my understanding, based on the readouts on the State Department website, that he said there was a preliminary interpretation that they might be in violation of the neutrality of the treaty of the canal. So again, President Trump is our commander-in-chief. He has said that all options are on the table. You know, if confirmed, that would serve at his pleasure. And again, part of all of those options is diplomacy, but ultimately, President Trump is our commander-in-chief, and I stand behind him and his policies.
Well, I understand that as his nominee, you would do that. Let me just register my opposition to sending the military in to take back the canal by force, and also my opposition to buying it back and to coercing the Panamanians in ways that would force them to give it back. So I appreciate your focus on diplomacy. Before I end my remarks, let me ask unanimous consent that materials relating to Mr. Rubenstein's and Mr. Huckabee's nomination be submitted for the record. I will also note for the information of members that the record will remain open until close of business tomorrow, March 26th, for members to submit questions for the record. I would hope that any questions that you all receive, you would try and get back to us as soon as possible. With that, and thanks to the committee, this hearing is adjourned.